With Red Dead Redemption 2 slated for release this spring if we're lucky, we've been thinking back over our adventures with John Marston and co. in the original Red Dead Redemption, which, if you can believe it, came out a little shy of 8 years ago. Given that it's been so long and that Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually a prequel, we thought that a refresher on all its events and characters is in order, so that we're ready and prepared to return to the Old West in a blaze of glory. So, here's Red Dead Redemption, the story so far. Going right back to the beginning, John Marston was born in 1873 to a prostitute who passed away while giving birth to him, and a Scottish immigrant born on the boat to America. His father later died in a bar fight when John was only 8 years old, and at some time during his teenage years he left his orphanage and fell in with a gang belonging to Dutch van der Linde. Dutch, who once saw himself as a Robin Hood type figure rebelling against the new wave of civilization and technology coming into the Old West, took John in and was very much like a father figure to him. But over the years, Dutch's idealism gave way to frustration at the New World and eventually the mindless murder of anyone who crossed him.
I never was much of a cook, but I did try to be a good wife.
It was while in the gang that John met Abigail, a prostitute who travelled with them. The two fell in love, got married, and had a son, Jack, in 1895, and later a daughter. In 1906, Dutch's gang attempted a bank robbery that went wrong, and John was badly injured and left for dead by his brothers in arms. He survives, however, and sees this event as an opportunity for himself, Abigail, and their children to leave their old life of crime behind and start fresh. He later buys a plot of farmland at Beecher's Hope in the Great Plains region of West Elizabeth Territory, dreaming of building a ranch and finally living an honest life. However, it was not to be. Sometime between 1906 and 1911, the unnamed Marston daughter passes away. Also around this time, the federal government creates the Bureau of Investigation to aid with the integration of technological advances like railroads, telegram offices, and stronger law enforcement into Western society. The Bureau puts corrupt agent Edgar Ross in charge of the Western Territory. One of Ross's tasks is to rid the region of the gangs running the area, and so Ross decides to use Marston to find and hunt down his remaining former gang members. In particular, one Bill Williamson, who started his own gang after Dutch went into semi-retirement. This gang eventually proves to be even more brutal than the one John was a part of. To force John into helping him hunt down former friends, Ross kidnaps Abigail and Jack, telling John that they will only be released after he tracks down Bill Williamson and the other gang members. It seems the Bureau is just as ruthless in its methods as the people it hunts. Left with no choice but to comply, John travels to Armadillo and finds that Williamson has holed up at Fort Mercer. But when John goes and stands outside the fort to try and talk Bill into surrendering himself,
Bill!
He unsurprisingly gets a bullet in his gut for his troubles, and is once again left for dead on the side of the road. He is found by local rancher Bonnie McFarlane, who pays Armadillo's doctor $15 to save John and then gives him a bed at the ranch where he can recover. Once John comes to, he makes things up to Bonnie by doing odd jobs around the ranch, though he gets an even more valuable Kentucky Saddler out of it too, a perk for when your boss is definitely thirsty for you. Eventually, after a nice time hunting rabbits, playing horseshoes, and following a dog around for a bit, Bill finds out that John survived and sends his men to set the ranch's barn on fire. And of course, John responds by being all heroic and making poor Bonnie fall in love with him a little harder in the process. Eventually, John and US Marshal Lee Johnson come up with a plan to assault Williamson's Fort Mercer that involves a little more thought than just walking up and asking him nicely to turn himself in.
Ah, Mr. Marston, good to see you.
John slowly gathers a posse of misfits, all with rather unique skills. Charismatic snake oil salesman Nigel West Dickens, well-connected drunkard Irish, and grave-robbing treasure enthusiast Seth Briers. The group concoct a plan to assault Fort Mercer with a Gatling gun obtained by Irish and using Nigel West Dickens and his wagon as a Trojan horse. Although the plan works and most of the men inside the fortress are mowed down, John discovers that Williamson has already fled to Mexico to seek refuge with another former member of Dutch's gang, Javier Escuela. John sets off to Mexico after Williamson, heading down to Nuevo Paraíso on a raft steered by Irish. Once there, the two part ways, and John meets with the region's governor, Colonel Allende, and his lackey, Captain de Santa, who then force John to work for them in exchange for information on Williamson and Escuela. While helping Allende, John also meets and trains with legendary gunslinger Landon Ricketts and revolutionaries Abraham Reyes and Luisa Fortuna, who plan on overthrowing Allende and the president, General Sanchez. However, Allende betrays John and orders him killed, but Reyes and his rebels rescue John just in time. John joins the revolution, and after killing Captain de Santa and capturing or killing Escuela, John leads an assault on Allende's villa. Luisa is gunned down after trying to save Reyes, who actually struggles to remember her name most of the time. But John and Reyes successfully manage to kill both Allende and, finally, Bill Williamson. Reyes and his rebels take over the villa and plan on marching to Mexico's capital. As per several hints to his true personality, Reyes eventually becomes quite the evil tyrant in later years, letting his people starve in the street while he lives in relative luxury. In the present time though, John heads back to Blackwater in America to meet with Edgar Ross again, hoping that his family can now be released. Of course, Ross isn't going to let John go just yet. He says that John must kill Dutch van der Linde before their deal is done. John works with the Bureau across West Elizabeth in a bid to track Dutch down, and also works with incompetent Yale professor Harold McDougall and long-suffering Native American informant Nastas. Eventually, with the help of the US Army, John storms Dutch's hideout.
Go! Get down!
Forward! Move in!
Hello again, John.
Hello, Dutch.
We gotta stop meeting like this.
Cornered, Dutch takes his own life rather than turning himself in or allowing himself to be killed by John, but not before warning John that the government will always find a new monster. His family finally freed, John returns to his ranch and begins the life he's always wanted.
Anyone here? Anyone home?
Oh, darling. I never thought I'd see this day again.
You no good hillbilly piece of shit!
However, just as Dutch predicted, Edgar Ross turns on John and, with the Bureau and the US Army at his back, arrives and attacks the Marston ranch. Though the family tries to defend itself, John realizes that the only way he can save Abigail and Jack is to sacrifice himself, and so he sends them off to safety and goes out in a brutal last stand against his enemies.
Ain't no trouble, Abigail. Ain't no trouble. I love you.
I love you.
Now go! Get!
bury me now.
His family buries him on a hill overlooking the ranch. 3 years later, after Abigail dies of unknown causes, their son Jack Marston avenges John's death by hunting down Edgar Ross and besting him in a duel. What happens to Jack after this is anyone's guess, but you could read his quest for revenge as a failure on the part of John to give his son a chance to live the crime-free life he wanted for himself. John Marston's story is kind of the story of the death of the Old West itself. The game begins in 1911, near the end of the 70-year span of the Western American frontier, and you can chart the slow creep of modernity into the old way of life as the game progresses, and see many people struggle with the new and unknown, like when Marshal Lee Johnson tries to use a telephone.
Hello? Hello?
Sounds fun. What's happening?
I have no idea.
But as well as the struggle between the old and new worlds, lots of the side missions in Red Dead deal with internal struggles with obsession and madness. There's Seth'S Obsession with treasure, but the majority of stranger quests touch on this too. In the side quest, Let No Man Put Asunder, an elderly woman waits in an abandoned church, in her wedding dress, for her fiancé who died years before. In Flowers for a Lady, John picks flowers for a man who then introduces John to his wife, a long-dead corpse he has propped up in their house.
Much obliged.
John also meets a girl dying in the wilderness who refuses help because she believes her faith in God will save her. So many supporting characters are self-serving and or delusional, believing themselves destined or deserving of something greater, which may be a comment on John's own personal journey for redemption too. This is hammered home even more by the mysterious multi-part side quest, I Know You.
Hello, John. John Marston.
A strange man somehow knows John very well and asks him to resolve some seemingly petty moral dilemmas. He's the only person John meets in all 3 regions of Red Dead Redemption's map, and in their final encounter he foreshadows the location of John's grave.
Ain't this a beautiful spot? Sure.
As the strange man walks away from John, John opens fire and the bullets do nothing.
Damn you!
Yes, many have.
So it's up to the player to decide whether the man is a figment of John's imagination, a product of John's descent into madness, God, the devil, or something else entirely. What we know of Red Dead Redemption 2 so far is that it's a prequel, taking place during the early days of Dutch's gang. You take on the role of the blue-eyed, square-jawed Arthur Morgan, who seems to be a far more ruthless individual than Marston, judging by the dialogue in the game's most recent trailer. He's the gang's debt collector, by the sounds of it, and swears his allegiance to a much younger-looking Dutch at the close of the trailer.
You have my back. Always, Dutch.
Given that we've never heard of Morgan before, anything could happen to his character in his time with Dutch's gang. But it seems like he's not quite as interested in seeking redemption or becoming an honest man as John was, at the beginning of the game at least. But if Red Dead Redemption 2 is to be in keeping with the themes of the original, or earn the redemption that's right there in the title, it feels like Morgan is going to have a change of heart at some point in the story, unless he's replaced entirely by other protagonists, which, given the fact that GTA 5 had multiple playable characters, isn't entirely out of the question. Well, it won't be too long until we find out more at least. What are your hopes for the prequel? Are you expecting John Marston to show up at some point, or do you just want to spend all your time in the bayou hunting gators? Let us know in the comments and stay tuned for more Red Dead videos on Eurogamer. Thanks for watching. Bye!